Don, can you hear me?
Can anybody hear us?
If the mic. Yes.
I need. Yes. Testing, testing, can anyone hear me?
I can hear you, but it's muffled.
I can hear you.
That's dramatic.
Yeah. Now to be sure you turn the Tracy's PowerPoint on here. Which we can do if you know actions this way, you know, we need something.
Don't be just already.
Oh, they're looking for it.
Sure. Screen.
I don't think I do. Oh, and then we have to, think before you share, you have to make it. Right. Yeah. Well. Oh, how are you? So I always so I walk.
Okay.
Here we go. It just seems
Sweet.
try.
Here.
And so let's share screen number 2.
3, 2.
Here and
Cover on.
yeah, been ready.
Can anybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, it's 6:30 and we're gonna go ahead and start the meeting. Welcome, welcome. I'm Dawn. I'm usually on Zoom, but I'm talking for more than 15 minutes today, so it may be hour and a half drive in worth it. So hi, it's nice to see everybody's faces. And for the folks on the OWL and Zoom, hi, hello. So the first thing we're gonna start with is Tracy's beginner lesson. And Tracy, are you there and are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm actually sitting in my.
Just to make sure, does everyone who is not here and is not Tracy see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Cool. Yeah, sure.
All right. Are we ready to go then, Don?
Yep, we're ready for it.
All right. Well, next slide, please. So it is. Definitely,
Hang on, it's not moving. Oh, there we
I
go.
got it.
so it is definitely swarm season, and I know several of you at least have picked up your bees and have installed them. So now what, right? So I've installed my bees. The thing to do is to not only continue to feed them 1-to-1 syrup so that they can build comb. It takes an amazing amount of sugar energy in order to make your comb. So the biggest mistake I see beavers make is they stop feeding too soon. So feed, and don't let the syrup run out. So 1 week after your package is installed, your queen should be released. And so if you have a queen that has not been released yet, after in that 1 week inspection, and the bees are just generally gently walking across her cage, go ahead and take the rest of the candy plug out and let her loose so that she can start laying eggs. And then a week after that, go ahead and go back and just make sure that she's laying eggs. You don't have to find the queen every time. Don't worry about that. But if you see eggs and larvae, you know you've got a queen in there. So as soon as you see those and larvae, I recommend that you just go ahead and stop your inspection and close them back up, because each frame that you remove, you run the risk of accidentally pinching or damaging your queen. And any experienced beekeeper will tell you that we have all accidentally killed a queen. So it happens to all of us, and the less you're in there, the better, for the queen's health anyway. And then, so when to add an extra box, once 80% of those frames are drawn out and have wax on them, and bees walking around them, you can go ahead and add your next box. The second biggest mistake I see beekeepers make that are new, after not feeding them enough, is adding too many boxes too quickly. So bees like to be a little crowded. I used to make the joke during COVID that bees don't like social distancing. They really don't. They like to be, you know, close to each other. And so it's important not to add a box too soon. And then keep feeding them. All right, Brian, next slide. On your inspection day, and by the way, tomorrow, if you have bees, is kind of the last day to do any inspections for a whole week, because it's going to be rainy and yucky and cold for the following week, is to just make sure that when you do open them up, that it's not, you know, too rainy, that it's not too windy, and that you've got a plan. So you do want to make sure and light your smoker right away. Suit up after you light your smoker so you don't accidentally melt your veil. I know a couple of people that have done that. That's no bueno, obviously. So light your smoker and then suit up. Have all your extra woodenware ready. So if you think you need to add an extra box, go ahead and have that ready out there. And then it's best not to remove frames with brood on them unless it's 55 degrees Fahrenheit or more, so that brood doesn't get chilled and die, because you're just trying to build up your population, and it sucks when you accidentally get them too cold and they die. So avoid opening when they're raining. That's why I said, you know, next week looks bad for beekeeping. So make sure that it's not raining on you, and that you can do your complete inspection, hopefully in the afternoon with the forager. Brian, go next slide. So a word on feeding, it's important to continuously feed them. This is a picture of one of my top feeders. You can see the bees are getting up inside that center part and drinking the syrup. Kathy has a great tip if you're using these top feeders. Sometimes the bees get in there and drown in the syrup, and she uses the toe of an old sock up over the top of that, so that the bees have something to stand on and not fall down in the syrup. So if you have those top feeders, the sock method seems to work really well. 1-to-1 syrup does not, I repeat, does not need to be heated, so it mixes cold right out of the faucet. And if you want to add a commercial additive like Pro Health or another one that the commercial bee places sell, go ahead and do that. At least on Pro Health, more is not better. They say that you can add up to 3 tablespoons per gallon. I found that over 1 tablespoon, the bees don't like it. So less is more on those. And then make sure that if you're using pollen patties right now, that you're using the summer pollen patties. Although, unless you have a package, it's probably not necessary to add a lot of pollen patties, because the bees are getting out right now and foraging a lot of pollen. If you just have a brand new package and they don't have any resources inside, they're going to get pretty hungry over the upcoming week, because they're not going to have a lot of time to go out and forage. And so that's why it's important to go ahead and just put like a half a pollen patty on the top, so that they've got food to feed that brood while they're stuck inside during the rainy weather coming up. It is just as important as the syrup, so make sure that you've got that. And if you usually have to buy them in packs of 10 if you're getting them online, so you can always freeze those, or you can make beekeeping friends and split a box of those and then freeze the extras. So when to stop feeding? So really it's once all of your wax is built out. And so that's a lot of time. And for those of you with packages or you bought nukes and all the rest of your frames are just foundation right now, you're probably going to be feeding throughout the entire summer. And so don't, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify the sock thing on the feeder. You actually don't do the toe. You cut the toe off and then you cut pieces that are the depth of the feeder and you put it on so that the bottom goes down into where the syrup is coming in and the little bottom holes around the very bottom of it. And then, spread it up over the sides and the bees will come up and they will, syrup will wick its way up and the bees will drink from the top rather than without the sock. They go down to the bottom where those little holes are and oftentimes get drowned in the sugar water.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy.
You bet.
All right, next slide. All right, and it is officially swarm season. I picked a swarm up this afternoon. Gonna go pick it up around dark. This is a picture of a swarm that I got several years ago. It's a repeating swarm tree. So I've got a swarm box over on this property, but there's really three main reasons why your bees are thinking about swarming. It's a reproductive urge. You can't stop that. What you can fix is having a too crowded brood nest area. We're going to talk about during the honey flow how to manage your space. But if your queen has nowhere to lay eggs, they're going to start creating swarm cells because they think they're out of space. So that's why you need to have 70 to 80% of the frames full, and then add space. And by the way, bees don't recognize undrawn frames as space. So think about adding, and that's the art of beekeeping really, is staying just ahead of their space needs so that they will build extra comb, but not swarm. And so the other reason why they swarm is they have a lack of nectar storage space, and nectar takes a lot more room to store than honey because the honey is dehydrated. And right now we've got a pretty good maple flow on, so you'll probably see wet nectar, and they'll continue to move that around in the colony and use it and store it, but that does take a lot of space. Next. Here's what swarm cells look like. If you haven't seen one before, they usually hang off the bottom of the frames in the middle part of your colonies. So if you're running two deeps, these are on the bottom of your top deep. And if you're running all mediums, it could be in between the second box and the top box, or it could be in between the middle box and the bottom box. So you've got to look for both. But if you want to look for swarm cells, it's a good idea to do that this time of year, starting now. And really all you have to do is tip the boxes forward and peek underneath there. And if you have a box that looks like this, they are going to swarm. So you see on the right hand side, kind of down towards the bottom of the slide, there's a fully kept queen cell there. There's one that got broken open on the left hand side. And then there's another fully capped one on that same frame, and then some that aren't quite finished yet. So if this were my colony and I was just seeing this, in fact, this is one of my colonies, but if I was seeing this, then this is my cue to immediately do a split. And just a walkway split's not going to work in this case. To stop the swarming urge, you've got to move the queen to a new box. So next slide, please. Here's my favorite swarm prevention split. So you need to move the queen and at least one frame of eggs and mixed brood, one frame of capped brood, and then a frame of pollen and honey to the new location. And so all the foragers will go back to the original location. So you need to make sure that there's plenty of food in this box for the queen and or for the bees to feed the queen and to feed all the new broods. So you those frames, by the way, include the adhering bees. So that's the way to move the queen into a new box. And if you could just click once on that slide, it'll load the rest of the. So then at a minimum on the colony that you're leaving on in the original location is you want to have the same thing, right? 1 frame of eggs and mixed brood, 1 frame of cap brood, and 1 frame of pollen. If there aren't queen cells like in that one, that
Tracy, I can't hear you anymore. You're kind of garbled. Can you repeat that?
Of those eggs so they can work quite a few queen cells. Or was it the same for everybody? Don, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's garbled for a minute. It cleared up, so keep going.
Okay, so at a minimum, you do want to leave eggs and capped brood and pollen and honey in the original location as well. If you don't have swarm cells already built, they'll make a new queen. If on that previous slide, you have multiple queen cells already going, then I would smash all but 2 of the capped ones. And that way you're gonna reduce the chance of after swarms. Notice I didn't say eliminate because there's no absolutes in beekeeping. But if you only have 2 queen cells, they'll duke it out for superiority, but you won't have extras that will be out and about and potentially taking after swarms out with them. Next slide. All right, and then this is a swarm that I got at the Kent East Hill Nursery several years ago. This is the largest swarm I ever got. You can see why it was the largest swarm I ever got because it's huge. But if your bees do swarm away, once they land, you need to gain permission to retrieve them on whosever property they've landed on, because once they leave your property, they're technically no longer your bees. They're the property of whosever property they land on. And then, so if you can't get the swarm, or if you don't want to attempt to get the swarm, and you have permission of the property owner, contact the person who's nearest to you on the PSBA swarm list, and they'll come get him, or they'll call one of the other folks nearby them to arrange to go pick those up. And I think that's the last one. Oh no, there's one more on resources. All right, so these are great resources. If you haven't already checked out Randy Oliver's First Year Beekeeping on his Scientific Beekeeping website, it's an excellent read. Dave Burns is a certified master beekeeper in the Midwest. That's the link for a whole colony inspection that he does. I highly recommend it if you're a new beekeeper. It's about a 15 or 20-minute watch, but it's excellent. And he points out several important things to look for while you're doing inspections. I do want to also mention that we do have the PSBA neighborhood captains and then the apiary parties as well. So check the website if you're interested in participating in a apiary party, because it does require a sign up. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dawn.
Okay, thank you, Tracy.
You bet.
Okay, so now we'll do the business portion of the meeting, and then we'll have a little bit of time for bee chat before we go into the presentation. So welcome those of you who finally found it. I hope it wasn't too hard to find. This isn't the room that we used to meet in this area, so I left a sign there, and hopefully you'll be able to find it. So the main thing that we're doing right now in the club is the apiary, and the apiary is booming. We've got a lot of bees there. We had 3 colonies that overwintered, and we installed 3 more. And Kathleen DeVilbiss is managing that for us, and she's doing a really good job. Twice a month on the weekends, you can come and join the apiary lessons, and they're just a lot of fun. We always have so much fun. There might be a problem with this weekend, so we might have to move this weekend's, but we will still hold one on the same topics. But you get live experience, which is absolutely invaluable. You can read books and watch videos and all of this, but actually watching someone handle a frame and take frames in and out and help you learn how to read a frame is just really invaluable experience. So I'm the one that's often out there in the apiary, and I don't bite. So come on out and see us. It's a lot of fun. People always really. So coming up, we do have an apiary day on the 27th. That is the one that might move. We want to talk about spring buildup and swarm prevention. On May 4th is the TILF plant sale. So we can't do an apiary day that day, but just, we're normally over there in the Arboretum. So their plant sale is on May 4th. Then we're going to have apiary days on the 11th and the 18th and the 25th. No, I'm sorry, the 11th and the 25th. So we're going to learn how to check mites. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about what Tracy was talking about, is how to make wool in your hive. And it really is one of the arts of beekeeping, is making sure that that queen and that brood nest always has an open drawn frame next to it. So there's always room for the queen to lay. And that's one of the best swarm prevention things you can do. And then on the 18th, Kit's not here tonight, but on the 18th, she will be managing the West Seattle Bee Festival. And she's going to need, I don't know, she has volunteers for it. No, I don't know. She could. Do you know if Kit has enough volunteers for the bee festival, or Nancy? I don't know. Don't know? Okay, she may need volunteers. It's really fun. You don't really have to have a lot of bee experience already with just one season. Whatever you've learned already, more than most of the general public. So it's a really fun day. We sell a lot of honey. We have an observation hive, and there's always lots of kids and lots of questions, and it's just a really fun day. So if you can help out and volunteer. And I just want to really thank,
Did you say May 18th?
Yes, May 18th. And it's not the West Seattle Street Festival, it's called the West Seattle Bee Festival. And they actually kind of have the whole thing around our club. So we show up with bees and with honey, and then they kind of build the rest of the festival around it. So it's I've never actually gotten to go, but Kit says it's just her favorite event. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank our volunteers. We are a volunteer-run organization. Everything here gets done by volunteers. We just had Cass step up and start doing the newsletter. I don't know if you've noticed a difference in the newsletter. She's really doing a good job. And the other thing that we could use a little bit more help in is the apiary. So if you've got a year or so of experience under your belt, and the Arboretum, you can drive to the Arboretum once a week during the spring, and then, every 7 to 10 or 10 to 14 days in the summer, and maybe once a month in the fall. We could really use your help, because Kathleen lives in Bellevue. And so for her to drive over every week this time of year is a long ways. And remember, this is swarm season. And one of the things you need to do is you need to go into your colonies every week. If it's a brand new colony, maybe not, but if you've overwintered that colony, you need to be in it every week looking for swarm cells. And that there's just a lot of swarms out there right now, so let's not have it be one of yours. And so then I think that's about it for the business portion of the meeting. So we've got about a half an hour. So I think what we're going to do is, Kathy, are you there? I'm here live today. Can you lead the Zoom portion of the bee chat? Yes, okay. That was a yes. Okay, good. Okay, and then how do you just put it on mute, or how do we split the rooms?
For sure.
Or I think just mute. I think we.
Everyone.
It looks like we should have been muted both ways, so I think we're good to go. Unless we get screamed at from the room. Did anyone have any questions about their bees?
Hi, my name is Elena. I actually have a lot of questions, but I guess I'll start with one. So Kathy, in your newsletter, you mentioned that you leave one frame empty. Do you like just leave it without the plastic, so without the foundation? Do you add any wire or anything for the bees to start drawing the comb, or do you just leave it empty?
Kathy, are you hearing us?
Oh, I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry.
So the question was, when we leave empty frames, do we leave them purely empty, or do we add anything to help the bees draw comb on the frames?
Oh, sure. Well, what I like to do is I like to get a short paint roller, and then I melt some wax, if you have wax. If not, find a beekeeper and get some from them. And then you roll the paint roller in the, I use like a little square cake pan in a frying pan that I put water in so that there's no chance of catching fire. And you roll the paint roller into the cake pan and then roll it across the frames. If that's all too much and you have a little ball of wax, you can just rub that ball of wax over the frames and that will attract them. If you don't have any wax, spray the frames with sugar water. Don't saturate them. Just spray them lightly on both sides and that will attract the bees and they'll eat the honey and or eat the syrup and know that there's more space there that they need to work on. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I was typing in the chat, so I didn't hear.
If you don't have foundation, Helena, yeah, one of the things you can do, because that what Kathy's describing is if you have foundation, you have like plastic foundation or something there. If you don't have anything there, there's a bunch of things you can do. You can buy a sheet of wax and put it in there. Or actually, I think I learned that from you, Kathy. You can also get a strip of the wax, you glue it in, and it's only a strip, and it gets them started as well.
Yeah, I will take a full piece of wax for a medium or deep, doesn't matter how you buy it. And then I cut it so that there's about 3 inches. And then I put it in the top slot in the top bar of the frame, little bead of glue in there, put it upside down so it's holding in there in that little slot. And in next to no time, it'll be dry. If it's crooked, if you know, if it kind of leans to one side or the other, you can kind of gently put it back up in the right position and the wax molds pretty easily to that. And the bees will more than likely draw out worker size comb because that's what they had to start with. However, bees really like to draw drone comb because they can store a lot more of their resources in that. So if you get one that tends to be mostly drone comb, what I do is I write drone comb on the top, and that's one of my drone combs that go in and out, and I pull the drones out with the mites and freeze it and put it back in again, and the bees clean it all out and it all starts all over again.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else has questions or stories about their bees?
Do you mind if I keep asking? I mean, if somebody else has questions, like just feel free to interrupt. But
Go ahead, Alana. Go ahead.
Go for it.
okay, sounds good. So I got a package of bees And for some reason I installed them in one of on their hive, but I left one of the boxes out because I don't know, because I didn't know what I was doing. So basically they also like the other box, so they're now split between two boxes, and I don't really know what to do.
No,
Since
no, are you saying that they went back to the box that they were sold to you in?
yeah, so I took them. So I took my package of bees in my hive. So it has like a bottom board and the box itself and the helicopter top. But they also in around my yard they found an empty box of with frames, and they're just hanging in there. And I just really know what to do because now are in between two places. I don't know if that
Oh,
makes sense.
how long have they been in the other box?
They've been there for like I installed them on Saturday.
This last Saturday.
Yes.
And so you haven't looked to see what's going on in either box this Saturday, correct?
Yeah, there's still some in there. So like
So
mainly
there's some in your hive and there's some in the box that they found somewhere else on your property.
yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so best thing to do is assume that the queen is in one box or the other and you don't know, and the bees that are in that box that just was foundation or wax or something, they don't have any eggs to make a queen. So what I would do is I'd take the main box and I would put a sheet of newspaper across the top of it, and then I'd take the other box and I'd put it right on top, and I wouldn't touch them for about 4 or 5 days, and the bees will chew through the newspaper and they will combine, and that way they wouldn't kill the queen. Because the bees that are separated now may think that they're a whole different group of bees. So you don't want to put them together and then wind up finding out that they've killed the queen. The newspaper is a combination that you normally can combine two hives together that both have queens. And you normally put the queen that you want in the bottom and put the newspaper on, and then put the hive that you don't want the queen on top. And with that, what happens is the queen pheromone from down below, heat rises. So up goes the pheromone through the newspaper to the ones on top. And that queen goes, oh, there's a queen down there. I've got to go down and kill her. And she goes down, 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 and gets into the other queen's territory. And the bees do what's called balling the queen. And they simply surround her very tightly, and she suffocates. And they do the job for you of getting a queen that you don't want gone and combining hives, which is something you tend to do more in the fall. But since you don't know where the queen is, just putting a newspaper in between them will take them several days before they successfully chew through the newspaper, and the pheromone goes up and down and up and down and gets all mixed up, and they know that that queen is now their queen, and you should be okay.
Oh, okay. Thank
Make
you.
sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Thank you.
Okay, now you may have some of the bees go back to where the original box was. And if you have another, like a little nuke box that you could put there with maybe a frame in it to catch those bees, then you can go and move them back again. And after they've been moved back to that first hive, the original hive, a couple of times, they wind up staying there. But you can only move bees 2 feet or 2 miles. You have to, you can only move bees 2 miles. If you move them just a couple feet away, the bees will fly back to their original place. If you move them 2 miles away, they forget the old place and they'll stay where they are. So you may have a little bit of bees going back to the box that they found, but move them back, pick the frame, shake them in, brush them in, whatever, and get them back with all the rest of the bees. And you may have to do that a couple times, but you should wind up getting them all back.
Kathy,
Oh.
is it possible that that second box actually has a swarm, you know, that it kind of was a swarm trap and not from the original package?
Very possibly, but Helena would be the one to talk about that. But if she has no bees, then it wouldn't be a swarm from her hives. It'd have to be another swarm that came in to the property.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, good idea to bring that up, Bill, because it's a very good possibility. You might want to do an inspection on that other box before you do anything to kind of cover Bill's question. If it was a swarm that moved into that box and it really wasn't any of your bees from the original package, then you want to take a look and see if you see any eggs in there. And you know, that would tell you that there is a queen in that box. Now that still could be your original queen. So then you have to go back to the hive that you originally set the bees up in, look in there and see if there's eggs in there. If there are eggs in there, then that proves that you've got a swarm in the other box and not any bees from your original package. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If I have a swarm in the box that they migrated into, should I just like leave them be?
Then you have a second hive. Congratulations. Awesome. Yes. Great question, Bill. Thanks. I didn't even think about that one. But that's perfect. That kind of covers all the bases.
I have a question before you were talking about brood or drone comb, and when it's full, you freeze it. And did you say like you pick out the
No,
drones?
simply, I usually have 2 drone combs per hive. So when I take one out, I put one in. And the one that I'm putting in, for instance, is the one that had been frozen. There's still the bee pupa and mites in those cells, but they're dead. So the bees will pull all of that out, clean it all out, polish the cell, and the queen will come back and lay in there again. And you keep watching that. And sometimes I'll put a little piece of masking tape on the top that I could put a date on, and it's sort of like remove by date, so that you don't wind up having a bunch of drones hatch out and have a big mite bomb in the hive.
Okay. So the bees do the cleaning up of, okay.
Yes,
all right.
absolutely.
Thanks.
I have a question, Kathy.
Sure, Steve. Hi.
Hi. I have a hive. Well, I have 2 hives that overwintered. One of the hives, and they're both very strong now, lots of eggs and capped brood and young bees doing exploratory flights and all that stuff. But on one hive, there's several bees that aren't able to fly, and they just walk across the grass. And I think they may have like a K-wing virus or something.
K-wing? Okay. Have you done a mite wash?
Yeah, no, I
Do you
did.
know how to do a mite wash?
Oh, yeah. I know how to do it.
I would do a mite wash on that hive immediately, because
Okay.
that is a result of mites being in the cells when the cell is just capped off. They move in there. And so it could be that they are eating into the fat bodies and and vectoring a virus. They've vectored 20 different viruses.
Right.
And K-wing is you know, one of the ones that you're seeing. And then I forget what the walking bees is. There's a couple of them that have the symptoms are walking bees. So it's normal to have some bees walking around on the ground,
Yeah.
but if you have a bunch of them, you know, definitely do a mite wash and check that out and do a treatment.
Okay, I'll do that tomorrow. Thanks.
You bet, Steve.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, Kathy. I wonder if you want to address them. One of them has to do with virgin queens, but also symptoms of mite viruses, and whether you treat right away or whether you wait until they're mated and have started laying. That's actually a hard call. Not sure what I would do.
Yeah. I would probably wait till the queen is mated and laying. Simple reason is, when I started marking queens, sometimes I missed that that was a virgin. I wasn't paying attention to the whole thing, and I maybe just didn't know what I was doing yet. And I marked the virgins, and when they went up to get mated, it was like the drones didn't like them, and so they either got barely mated or not mated at all. So my feeling is you leave the virgins alone until you see eggs, and then you can do your treatments. Okay, for whoever asked that, thank you.
Let's see, and then we have a question from Ashley. I made a split off my main hive and I want to do OAV. Oh wait, it's moving. When all the brood has hatched, I have honey supers on currently. How long do the supers need to be off for the oxalic acid vaporization treatment? And what do I do with them while they need to be off for treatment?
Okay, I'm a little bit confused. So there's an overwintered hive, and you want to treat? Is that what I'm getting?
Yep.
Yeah, I can just talk. It might be easier.
Thanks, Ashley. Help this old lady out.
I have an overwinter hive that I just made a split off of. I took the queen out of the overwintered hive and made the split with her. So she's gone out of the box. I want to take advantage of them being the brood break and treat with the OAV. But I currently have honey supers on that hive. So I know you can't do OAV with the honey supers on. So I wanted to find out first off how long they need to be off, and then what do you guys do with them?
Put them on another hive that you're not going to treat. It will keep,
Okay.
you know, it will keep bugs and all of that out of it. It's an easy way to, you know, make sure that your honey is going to still be your honey. And you can also use, you know, this time of year with honey supers and brood and all of that, you can use Formic Pro. So maybe to have a couple of different treatments that you use. It's always good to spell off and do something different, because if you give the mites the same treatment over and over again, they can build a resistance to it.
Well, I was actually going to do Formic on my splits, but I was going to wait a little bit. How long would you recommend before treating on those? I was going to use Formic.
I would wait until the queen has been mated and is laying.
I'm sorry. So I moved my queen into the split.
Oh,
So
okay, you split the hive and queen's in one, and then another one is going to make a queen, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I did a mite wash today after my split, and one of my hives had 6 bites. So I want to do a treatment. So I have a hive that has no queen but has honey supers, and I have a hive that has a queen, and I just moved her into the split.
Okay. Really good question, because there are going to be eggs in both of them. I think I would just stick with Formic Pro, and I would treat the hive that has the queen, the old queen, and I would wait until the new queen in the split has hatched and has eggs.
Okay.
Also, I should point out that OAV is safe to use with honey supers on.
Oh, okay. I thought it was not.
No, yeah, it's perfectly safe.
Oh,
Okay.
good. I couldn't remember. So thanks, Ben.
I would hold off on Formic Pro with honey supers on, but yeah, OAV is definitely safe.
Is Formic Pro different than the formic acid?
Same thing, yeah.
Oh, I thought you could use Formic with the honey supers on.
You probably they probably say it's okay. I wouldn't necessarily want to be eating that honey, because after smelling the Formic Pro coming out of the packages, I don't know. I've never done it, so I don't know if it taints, but
Okay. And on the splits where the queens are in, how long after making those splits would you recommend waiting to treat?
We're talking about the split that has the queen?
Yes, so I just took her out today, put her in a new box. How long would you wait before I get in there, mess with them, and do a treatment?
I don't think you should have to wait on that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the Formic Pro, most of what is on the hive right now, these are going to eat up. It's not like you're going to be pulling that out and extracting it. So I don't think there's a big.
Kathy, I can't really hear you.
Oh, with the Formic Pro with honey on, most of the food, the resources that are in the hive now, the bees will be eating up, and it's in your brood area. You don't have honey supers on that, do you? Or do you?
I have honey supers on the hive that currently does not have a queen.
Yeah, okay. Well, the one that has the queen, then I wouldn't worry about it. And on the other one, supposedly you can, treat with Formic Pro when the honey is on, but I would probably just for safety's sake to not have a funny flavored honey, I would move the honey to another hive that I wasn't treating, and then you could move it back after you've gone through a treatment period.
Okay, that's a good tip. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
We have a question from Anderson that I think is interesting to talk about. And Anderson, feel free to unmute yourself if you want. Looks like it's a new nuke that hasn't touched the syrup or pollen patties at this point and doesn't seem to be building comb or building anything. Looks like there's small larvae in there. Haven't seen eggs, but not necessarily that easy to see. I'm assuming you're a relatively new beekeeper, and Anderson can unmute himself. So it could be a sluggish hive a little bit, or it could just be that they're getting started. So I don't know if you have any extra questions, or if anybody wants to kind of build upon that.
Let me ask, are there do you have cat brood in that hive?
I haven't asked that yet.
Okay, well that would be a question I would have. And if you don't have cat brood, then you may have you just have open larvae and eggs and what have you. You may have an adult population where there are not enough young bees, because the bees that draw wax and also make royal jelly, which is the food for the queen, they are 5 to 15 days old. That's why when I make a split, I go back after the queen has hatched and is laying and take a frame from another hive of capped brood and add it to make sure there's plenty of young bees there to feed the queen and to make the wax. Just because you're feeding doesn't mean that bees are going to draw out wax. You have to have that young population in the hive and in pretty massive amounts to get wax drawn out rapidly. I hope that helps, Anderson. Do we have any more questions in the chat?
Nope, that's the end of the questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody else has any questions or comments or.
Oh, they're all asleep. Well, wake up, everybody, because Dawn has a really good talk coming up here.
Can I ask another question? Yeah, so I installed my bees on Saturday and I gave them some syrup on Sunday. How often should I check to feed more syrup?
That's very hard to tell, because it depends on the population that you have in the hive. Usually a package is around 10,000 bees. But as the queen lays eggs, now none of those bees or that queen were each other's. They're just all weighed out, and then a queen is added in a little cage. And so everything is starting from the beginning. And so basically, I'm sorry, I got somebody here. Hold on.
Here, I'll answer a little myself. From my own notes, this time of year, they'll take about 2 cups of sugar. So 4 cups of sugar syrup per day if they are fully populated. For a nuke, it's probably closer to once every 3 days for that amount.
Good answer, Sven.
Okay,
I think
thank
that,
you.
one of the best ways is just to monitor your bees. And, if you notice that the syrup has gone down in 3 days, then look every 3 days. You don't want an interruption in the syrup, because those 5 to 15-day-old bees, if they have an interruption in their feed, they stop drawing wax and oftentimes will not start up again. So I would go towards the side of just making sure there's always syrup in there. If it's looking low, add some more. And just realize that as the population gets larger, that is going to be taken up much faster. Also, if we have rainy weather, the bees will be taking up the syrup because they're not bringing anything in.
Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
We have a double question here around how soon do we need to start feeding nooks? Whether we need to start right away, and whether we need to put rubbing screen on.
Yeah, absolutely. Feed from the very start. Don't have any interruption in it. Very, very, very important. The hive is like I said, it's weighed out if you've got packages. If you've got a nuke, you've got related bees and a queen, and you've got bees in all stages. So you need that, and you also need pollen. Pollen is a protein. Syrup is a carbohydrate. They're just like us. They need both of those things to survive. And then the queen needs those 5 to 15-day-old bees that produce royal jelly to survive. So you have to really keep an eye on all of that stuff.
And I'm no longer in Seattle, so I sort of assumed that now is the right time to put wasp traps out, or is it a little early still?
The wasp traps would go out in February to kill queens. I have seen so many yellow jackets already. And so I put robbing screens on this year right now. I didn't wait.
Oh,
Normally I don't put them on until June, because the population of yellow jackets, who are the main predators of our honeybees, is up in July, and that's when they go crazy. But last year was a terrible, terrible year for them. We had so many, it was just unbelievable. And I think this year is probably going to be the same, just by how many are out already.
Good to know. My queens haven't even started emerging up here.
Ah,
Yep.
well, that's what you get over there in Montana, girlfriend.
Yep, I think I usually trap the queens in mid-May through June, actually.
Makes sense. I mean, you've got snow on the ground, so yeah.
Mhm.
We had a 71-degree day today, so.
It looks like we have an additional question that I haven't had time to read. Question about drone frame. Is it a bad idea to start a new hive with a drone frame in it? It is placed in the 7th frame slot, and the bees are not building on it or going past it. Should I wait to add the drone frame until the hive is more populated?
I don't think it hurts. They'll expand the cluster out, and if it's not drawn, I would tend to put it right on the edge of the cluster to encourage them to draw the wax, and then to have it over in positions 7 through 10 or 1 through 3. Pretty good spot to have it, that the queen will still lay in it, because that's what you want. You want to trap drones. That's the whole idea of the integrated pest management. I move mine around. You know, I'm not a proponent of the draw a diagonal line across your frames and never put them in any other order but that. I move frames all over the place. If I see that I go into a hive and I see that the bees have got this side next to the cluster all filled out with syrup and pollen, I'll turn it around and put the empty sides toward them to help them out. You know, because I want them to be all built up by the time the blackberries are blooming. Yeah, David's right. He said that the commercial drone frames don't have any wax on it. If you've been a beekeeper and you have some wax around and you don't want to go through the exercise of melting it down and painting it on, just make a ball of it and rub it on. It's that little bit of wax that just gets them excited, and they go to it and they take their mandibles and they reform it and they start building out the frames. So yeah.
One thing I found is Amazon now has wax molds for creating your own wax foundation. They're fairly crappy in that they're all brood frame size cells as a single thing, but still it's a great starting point if you have the spare wax.
Yeah. The other thing about it all being brood size combs is the heat of the hive oftentimes stretches combs, and it'll stretch it around the edges and down towards the bottom. And if you noticed on the one frame that Tracy had with the queen cells on it, on the very bottom of the frame, the ones that are going sideways, like if there was still, a foundation there, those are usually all drones that they pack down there because they can make the cell any size that they want it to be. So just because it's all worker frame, it will not all be filled with workers. And the bees like to keep somewhere around 5 to 10% of drones in the hive, and it's sort of like a feeling of completeness. We got the girls and we got the boys and we got the mother. Okay, we're all complete, and they know these from pheromones and all of that, what the balance is, and the queen gets that all figured out, and it's totally amazing. Let's see. David says, Kathy, do you have any anecdotal? Oh, it went away. I think it's queens that are grafted versus queens that are raised. Is that right, David? Okay. I don't know that there's any big difference. Obviously the queens that are raised are being raised by the experts. The bees know the day that egg lays down into the little comma and hatches into a larva. That's called the first instar larva, and that is the one that they will make into a queen. Now, they prime cells with royal jelly. That's the queen's food. When you are grafting, you need to make sure that you're pulling some of that royal jelly out of some other cell to prime the cup that you're going to put the graft into, to make sure that it's going to get a good start. A lot of people just dry graft and, they get queens, but I think that the ones that start out with lots of royal jelly do much better and last a lot longer. Okay, Patty says, right? Okay, so just another tool besides the wash. I'm not sure what you're saying, Patty.
No, that's because I'm explaining the idea of the drone frames as a mite control technique. That was missed earlier in the conversation. So I don't know if you want to go over how you use drone frames for mite control, because you didn't kind of go to the basics, and so I was trying to type and explain that. So
hi Hi, Kathy. I think I must have missed that whole discussion about drone frames. So I was just wondering, is that something that's highly recommended or
Oh.
just another tool in addition to the wash that we all know about?
It's kind of another tool, but it's also part of integrated pest management. Now that means doing your bees without using a lot of chemicals. And one of the things that we can do is have a brood break. If there's no brood for the female mite to go into, she is not going to lay a son and 5 daughters and have them hatch out and you know, create a monster in your hive. I think that what was I going to say about that? Well, tell me your question again about how you, it's how you use the
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
Do you like how
so
many
in integrated
frames do
pest
you?
management, you're gonna have, or well, at least I do. I have 2 frames for each hive. And I don't put them in every box. I just pick one box where the cluster is, and I'll put that frame in. You know, when it gets drawn out, then it's simply just putting it in and keeping an eye on that. And since you're in there every 7 to 9 days, you're going to see when an egg goes in there. And so you just plot it out on a calendar. And the drones are drones for 24 days in their cell. And that's why they create the mite bombs, because the workers are only 21 days in a cell. In 21 days, the mother that goes in there, she lays the boy first and then she lays daughters. Now, there's barely enough time for the boy to become fertile. And oftentimes he cannot fertilize the daughters. So one goes in, one comes out. Sorry?
We're gonna get started on the presentation. Do you want to wrap up what your description is?
Of course, of course. So with the drone cell, those 3 more days allow the boy to fertilize the sisters. So one fertile goes in and 5 to 7 or so come out, and that's what creates your bomb. So in order to protect your hive from that, you have to be aware of how long is an egg, how long is the larva, when does it get capped over, and then how long is it before it hatches. So you want to be in that period between the time it's capped over and between the time it emerges, to pull the frame and freeze it and put another one in its place.
Right. Okay, thank you,
sense, Patty?
Kathy. Yep,
Sure.
thank
If you have any more questions, just text me and or call
I
me and
will.
talk about it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
They're gonna get a good opportunity for me to tell you what's going on. So, stuff that has been doing it, some of it is on tables out here for I have to go out of that, but I don't know what that's is. It's still minimum bid silent auction. And so you can if you like it, you can put your name on it. I put my name on a couple of things for the 0 amount, but you can outbid me. Sam just use pen here to put out something, and we just have a drawing, so that's what the tickets were for. So, let's see, so the first covenant item, there are a bunch of things. Oh, there's the other thing about the tables out there, one of the table on the side against the wall is, everything on there is free. There's a bunch of stuff there. There's a different thing who a couple of their data catalog. Choosing certain. The data you can cover this one, this is body sharing. System, we're just where do I find screen to? And all the started back to saying that's may or may not be used. It can be doesn't take them. I want to have it. And so I don't know. Like most of it's this kind of eyeball stuff, but the study stuff from this taking it again. different tools, the smokers, a couple of suits, they're not full suits, but they're jackets with veil. Like a pair of gloves, couple of tools, bottling bucket, that sort of thing. And so there's the thing that Dana was kind enough to donate to us include three things. They include a free subscription to American Bee Journal. Gateway High School. And you can copy of the. It's already notes. So with that in mind. We would have to yes, on the drawing. These, I think they get ticket. Everybody who does that, you want to take it. I know they have a mask. So it's all very individual. For the subscription. The word the subscription and then the tool and then the book. So this is for, this ends in 536. Yeah. 045-536. Anybody know that? Could you? Okay, no. You get pictures. The other thing is, American Bee Journal. There you go. They've always keep it on slide. There's where the just asking who can see it. Very. We'll get your mic and see it there. Is the mic, is it through the mic or something like? Yes. Yeah. 540-045-540.
Hey Kathy, can you see the slides advancing?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, thank you.
19, so they can have 045-540. Oh. Why don't we pull off on that for a minute?
Can I jump in, Bruce?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, can I?
Yeah, what about you guys? Did you get 540?
Well, I kind of did, but I don't need a prize. But I want to start my presentation.
Oh, well, you can't go yet. So if we want to go again, we'll go again. If you don't want that, I can go again.
What's the other thing for getting typed?
Well, this one is 520. Or on the right here. Yay! Come on, there we go. Okay. You get this one? You do. There we go. Oh, right. And the next one is for the book.
This is a great book. This is like 65 books. And it's like, I really look like, but it's.
No, read out your people with a crown. 519. There you go. Okay, and so if the presentation gets really boring, take a step out and look at the stuff on the table and put it in because I really don't want to go home. You want to throw the tickets away now? What's that? You need the tickets on the front. Yeah, you get the tickets.
Okay, so let's jump in because I generally take a full hour for this presentation because there is a lot of information here that I want to make sure to give you guys tonight. So this presentation tonight is on fat bodies and we're going to learn what those are. And bear with me, my brain is getting a little older and I sometimes say fat bellies, but I always mean fat bodies and honeybee lifespan. We're going to learn how it affects all the different things within the colony. The reason why this subject interested me is I heard when I first started beekeeping many years ago, they told us that the varroa mite fed on the hemolymph or the blood of the bee. And then Sammy Ramsey, and if you've ever seen Sammy Ramsey, he is fabulous. It's so fun to watch his presentations. He discovered that the varroa mite feeds on the fat body of the bee and not the hemolymph. And so I wanted to know, I was really curious, is that a permanent effect? Can we help our bees overcome the damage that the varroa do? And so, I'm taking my Cornell master's program right now, and I'm taking my finals this summer. And as part of that, I'm doing a presentation. You have to do a presentation, and they said, pick a subject and do. It only had to be a 15-minute presentation. I didn't realize that, so I built a whole hour presentation. So this is for my Cornell finals. I've done this for a lot of clubs in the area, and I did this for the Washington State Beekeepers Association conference last October, and I'll be doing it again. I think Dewey asked me to do this for the Western Apicultural Society conference when it comes around. So it's got a lot of really good information in it. Samuel Ramsey. Yeah, he's just so energetic and so amazing and so fun to listen to. And his latest topic that he's been on is trophy mites. So if you want to, if you haven't had enough about varroa, you can learn about a new kind of mite that's on the horizon we're worried about. So what is a fat body? It's a nutrient-rich organ that is right in the abdomen of the bee. So it's in this red area here. And the fat body is what produces vitellogenin. And vitellogenin is just kind of a fancy word for brood food. This is the food of the entire colony, is developed in the nurse bees in this fat body organ. Okay, and what happens is the vitellogenin, so just think of vitellogenin as brood food. The vitellogenin goes through the bee's circulation and it goes up into the hypopharyngeal glands, which is up in the head. And up in the hypopharyngeal glands is where the food for the actual brood is made. But they take it from vitellogenin to brood food up in the hypopharyngeal gland. And then there's two more glands on either side of the mandibles. And that's where the bees feed the young and they feed the queen. So when you see them feeding the brood, they're always head first down into a cell. And that's because it's coming out of their mandibular glands. So let's take a look at what vitellogenin is made of. It's this essential ingredient in honeybee colonies. So the original vitellogenin that our fat bodies make is 91% protein. It's almost all protein. Pollen is 50% protein. And what happens is the nurse bees eat pollen and they use their fat bodies to take the protein out of that pollen and make vitellogenin that they feed the queen and all of the babies, and almost every bee in the colony gets fed by the nurse bees. There's also a little bit of fat and a little bit of sugar in it. So with vitellogenin, they then convert that into royal jelly to feed the queen. Now the queen only eats royal jelly. She doesn't drink water. She doesn't eat honey. She only gets fed by the nurse bees. And so you can see the queen's food has got a little more than half water. And then it's got some proteins and sugars and vitamins and minerals. And then the brood food, here you can see, so right there, low gal person there feeding the brood. It's half vitellogenin. And then depending on the age of the larva, there's pollen that's mixed in there. And then there's a little bit of the royal jelly in there also for the brood food. You've heard that what differentiates a worker bee from a queen bee is the fact that the worker bees are fed pollen. So something about feeding the larva pollen has a physiological effect on the larva and makes it so that it does not turn into a queen bee. So there's a varying amount of pollen that goes into the brood food depending on the age of the larva. They start out with just a little bit of pollen and then it gets to be more and more as the larva gets older. Oh, this is a question. Yay. So let's take a look at what the fat body does in the bee. Okay, it's got a lot of functions. It really is the powerhouse of the bee. So it stores food for the colony. The fat body in every nurse bee is like a pantry for the entire colony. They store honey in the cells and they store pollen in other cells. but that food, the pollen is not accessible to the bees to eat as a nutrient unless the nurse bees eat it and convert it into vitellogenin in their fat bodies. So all that stored pollen is only eaten by the nurse bees. So it stores, every nurse bee has a fat body, and that is the stored house of protein for the entire colony. It's the proteins. The fat body is also like a liver. It helps to filter out pesticides and it detoxifies. It's the bee's immune system. So down here, it produces antimicrobials against toxins. So we'll look at that in the next slide. They also create hormones. Hormones come from the bees' fat bodies. So remember, the bees' form of communication is pheromones between individual bees, is pheromone communication. And then within a bee, the way the bee's body changes related to those pheromones is the hormones. And all of that regulation within the bee comes from the fat body. And then also the fat body helps them to sense hot and cold, thermal regulation within the colony. So what happens is if their fat body is damaged and compromised, they can't tell that the colony is getting cold, and they have a harder time generating heat to keep it warm in the winter, which can contribute to colony collapse. So here's a little bit about how the fat body helps create immunity to the bees. So what we're not covering in this presentation is the viruses. All we're covering is the physical damage to the fat body that the varroa mites do. And that's only half of the story. The bees really get sick from the viruses. But here's how the fat body, when it's damaged, reduces the bees' defenses against viruses. So foragers are out on flowers and they pick up pathogens when they're out in the big world, gathering nectar, seeing other bees. And worker bees, they bring it back to the hive and they make it into that bee bread. So it goes into the cells and gets stored for feeding the nurse bees. Within the nurse bees, if they've got nice, healthy fat bodies, they take that bacteria and they break it down into pieces. So it's basically a killed bacteria or a killed virus. And then it's in pieces of dead bacteria are in the vitellogenin, which is then fed to the larva. So as the nurse bees process all of these viruses through their body, they break it down and they basically inoculate the babies against getting sick with viruses within their fat body. And so they all have natural vaccines. I think you've probably heard that we now have a vaccine for queen bees against American foul brood. So that's done in this same process. What they do is they take a queen bee and they feed her broken American foul brood. It's a sporiated fungus. So anyway, sporiated bacteria. They feed her a broken form of American foul brood. Then it goes into her eggs. And so then the eggs that she lays is for brood that is immune to American foul brood. Now, as soon as she's superseded and goes out and you get a new queen, then that all goes away. But it's kind of a new kind of thing in queen rearing. Yeah, and they're really expensive queens too. Yeah, it's one of those breeder queen things, and then it goes away so fast, right? So, but what they do is they just have a dish of pollen, special pollen that they feed. They put the queen in a special cage with a bunch of nurse bees that only eat this with the broken virus, and then it inoculates the queen. So it seems like they should be able to have something like that available to regular beekeepers, I would hope someday. So where does vitellogenin come from? All animals have vitellogenin. Bees are animals, and it's actually an egg yolk precursor. So every animal that makes eggs has vitellogenin. Most animals use their vitellogenin to make their own eggs, whatever type it is. But with bees, they've got cooperative brood care, and only the queen makes and lays eggs. So all these worker bees aren't making eggs. They have this storage, extra storage of vitellogenin. And so they've developed a system then where it goes up through their hypopharyngeal gland and they can feed the brood using their stored vitellogenin instead of making eggs. So why is it beneficial to the individual bee to raise the queen's babies and not have that bee raise her own brood or lay her own eggs? And the reason is because the queen is so specialized. She's kind of an egg laying machine. She can lay 1,500 eggs a day. Worker bees, when they go to being a laying worker, they can only lay like 2 to 5 eggs per day. So even if the queen has mated with 25 drones, the queen can still lay more eggs of that bee's genetics than the bee herself can lay. So there's a real evolutionary advantage to the bees to taking care of this communal brood. So let's talk a little bit about pollen. Pollen is incredibly important in the colonies, and we're only just now starting to learn about the different kinds of pollen. There's pollen substitutes. What's the best nutrition for bees? And that's a really new area that they're researching a lot. And people often want to know, what kind of plants can I plant for my bees, or what's the highest pollen plant? And it really varies a lot by region and even by season. So the pollen in the spring is different than the pollen in the fall. And even within individual plants, the amount of pollen they can produce can differ. So it's really complex. So there isn't any clear-cut answers on what's the best type of pollen to get bees. Although I think eventually we're going to come up with better pollen patties, because I don't think the pollen patties that we have are a complete enough nutrition for them. But this is what pollen actually looks like. I think that might be on the hairs of the bee, but pollen's really pretty. But the real nutrition in the hive comes from the pollen. It is the #1 food source. So bees will, based on how much brood is in the colony, you always know a colony is brood right, because you see pollen coming in the door, right? The foragers go out, they get the pheromones from the little bees, and they go out and they forage for pollen. Bees can collect a single colony can collect up to 100 pounds of pollen a year. You know how light pollen is. It's a lot of pollen. And oftentimes when you go into your colony, you may not even see it there. They eat through it so fast. Right now, there's a ton of pollen in the hives. This is really, we're having a great pollen year. So that's really nice. But they go through a lot of pollen. It's basically what the entire hive is raised on. So the stimulus that causes, I talked about that already. So I want to talk a little bit about the brood pheromone. So bees communicate with each other through pheromones, and those pheromones create physiological changes in the bees. So when you've got a comb that has open brood on it, those are all baby bees that want to be fed, and they're exuding a pheromone. And that's going to sound like a nursery full of crying babies, right? Feed me, feed me, feed me. They're all hungry, little larvae, all they want to do is eat. And all of those pheromones that they're exuding triggers the bees to mature faster into foragers, so they can go out and bring more pollen in to feed the brood. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they can change their rate of aging. Oh, here we go. We'll go into that now. Honeybees are one of the few animals that can actually change the rate at which they age. And it's called plasticity in aging. So honeybees have the ability to speed up or slow down how fast they age, depending on the needs of the colony. So this time of year, we've got a lot of brood on the combs, and it's all those larvae saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. That triggers as many as possible of those nurse bees to speed up and convert into foragers, so they can bring more food into the colony and feed the building brood. But let's say there's not enough nurse bees to feed the brood. If too many have gone out and become foragers, and they've got hungry brood that aren't getting fed, then they can actually slow down the aging of the nurse bees as they convert to foragers. And so they can have more nurse bees in the colony at a given time. And actually, if a forager has been out there for just a couple of days, not too long, just a short amount of time, foragers can actually convert back to being nurse bees. And they can go back to nursing duties, which means as a bee ages, there are various glands on their body that atrophy and mature. And one of the first glands to mature is this fat body, the very first one, because their first job, remember, is to be nurse bees. And then as they age, the fat body begins to atrophy and the wax glands come online and they start exuding wax and they start going around and building comb and curing honey and doing things like that. So their glands do different things that then dictate what their job is in the colony based on their capabilities. The fat body, the size of the fat body and how well it's functioning dictates the nutrition and the immunity for the entire colony. So if you've got bees with damaged fat bodies who aren't able to produce vitellogenin, then it really truly affects the entire colony. A larger fat body that hasn't atrophied allows bees to live longer. Okay, so as that fat body begins to atrophy and they go out and become foragers, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's all used up in the field and they die. Okay, so it's really an efficient mechanism because think of that fat body as the food storage for the entire colony. If the foragers had full fat bodies and they went out in the field and died, it would be a real waste. They would lose all of that nutrition for the colony. So it's a really kind of beautiful and efficient way that the bees give their all every day for the colony is they use up all of that vitellogenin and then they die without taking any of it with them. So it's very, very efficient. So what causes variable aging? It's primarily the demands of the different pheromones in the colony and triggering off the hormones that cause hormonal changes and cause the bees' organs to mature and atrophy in time. So it's kind of that balance between nurse bees and foragers. So as hive conditions change, the bees need a different balance of either nurse bees or foragers or whatever it is that the jobs that need to be done. And it's all a really delicate and precise dance of pheromone messages and the hormone responses within the bees. So let's take a look at some experiments that were done with older hive bees as an example. They're the ones that are no longer doing nursing, but they're not yet foragers. So they are the ones that are producing wax and being guard bees and things like that. In one experiment, all of the foragers were taken out of a test colony. And the forager pheromone went down. And as the pheromone went down, there was no more food coming in, and the call for food went up. This caused those middle-aged nurse bees, those middle-aged bees to mature into foragers faster because they needed to bring in more food. And in another case, a large amount of foragers were added to a colony. And we kind of did newspaper combined and got all those extra foragers in there. And this resulted in the middle-aged bees slowing down and aging more slowly because they didn't need more foragers. And in a third experiment, all of the nurse bees were removed from a colony. And since there's fewer nurses to feed the brood, the hunger pheromone went up, and it was found that some of those early foragers were able to revert back and feed brood. Now, once that organ has atrophied a little bit, they're never quite as good at feeding brood. They can, but not as good as if they were full-on nurse bees. But it does bridge needs within the colony until the next round of brood emerges. And as beekeepers, we sometimes change the balance within a colony. So we talked about maybe moving some brood from one colony to another, right? This ability for the bees to speed up and slow down aging lets them quickly recover from these kinds of manipulations that we do within the hive. And we also unbalance the colonies when we do splits, things like that. Any kind of splits, you may or may not get the same number of bees in the same one. So it's really nice that they're so So variable like that. So Randy Oliver says that this is why you can raise queens with really young foragers if they're given a few days to recover. So we're going to briefly go through how honeybees age. We're going to spend most of our time on nurse bees, but it's kind of important to look at all of the stages. So this here is a representation of the fat body. It's kind of small and developing. And first 3 days that a bee emerges, her fat body is small and she is primarily fed by other bees. And she just kind of cleans the hive and builds up the size and storage of her vitellogenin. Days 3 through 12 is nurse bees. Okay, so that 3rd through 12th day. And that fat body is fully developed. They are eating pollen. They are making food for the colony. They're at their peak of feeding the colony. Now, the entire colony depends on the food these nurse bees make. So remember, when the foragers fly out, their fat bodies are decreased quite a bit. And in fact, as they get to be older house bees, they can pretty much process enough pollen into vitellogenin to feed themselves. By the time they're foragers, their fat bodies are so small that the foragers can't even process their own protein. So they go out and they get pollen and they bring it back to the hive and they beg the nurse bees for some food. And then they head back out again and get some more. So the nurse bees really do feed the entire colony. And the need for pollen of the nurse bees at this point is the highest in the bee's life. This is why it's really important to pay attention to where your pollen frames are. You want to have those pollen frames right next to your brood, because these are little 3-day-old bees and they haven't really done the whole tour of the whole hive yet. They only know their little area. So you want to make sure that that pollen is really close. So those nurse bees can eat that pollen and bring it back to feed the brood without having to walk all over the colony. And what I do when I winterize my hives is, you kind of rearrange your hives a little bit. You put the bees in the bottom and the food on the honey on the top, right? So they have, so they can work their way up in the winter. I always make sure there's a pollen frame right in the middle of that top box. That way, when the bees are working their way up in the winter and they're raising those first brood in January, February, March, before they're out foraging, that those nurse bees have access to really high quality pollen first thing in the spring.
So when you say pollen frame,
Sorry. There's a lot of terminology in beekeeping. And so hang in there. I promise it does get easier. I promise. So the foragers go out and they bring in, you've seen what I call pollen pants. They've got big pellets of pollen on their legs. Okay. So they bring that into the colony and a receiver bee will receive that pollen pellet from the bee and she'll go and she'll put it into a comb. And they add a little bit of enzymes and honey to that pollen, and then they pack it down with their heads. You can actually see them on the pollen frames, packing it down with their heads. And the enzymes and the honey cause the pollen to ferment a little bit and make it easier to digest for the bees. So really that pollen that's in the frame is the best pollen for the bees. And that's called a pollen frame because they often put a whole bunch of pollen all on adjacent cells and you can see it. It's really pretty. It's all different colors. Usually in the Northwest, it's mostly orange. I actually saw at the Arboretum, I saw green pollen today. I've never seen that before.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Okay, bee pounds down with their head,
Mm-hmm.
and then what is the duration, go back to mathematics, for anything bees do, the duration of time, because they would say, no, we can't use that, it's fermented too far, or it's too green. Nature has a rule.
Yeah, and I don't know, you're asking, does it expire? Does it go stale? I don't know. So no, they go through 100 pounds of it a year. And so I think that they kind of rotate, they probably do a or a FIFO or something like that to use it all up. But I do know that there are pathogens stored in pollen. So that's, they're out in the flowers picking up pathogens and stuff. So if I have a colony that died, and I think maybe they died from viruses, and there's frames in there, I'll give them back the honey frames, but I throw away the pollen frames. I don't give them old pollen because I worry, things like European foul brood is, I believe it's in the pollen. So it comes from the nurse bees getting the virus and then feeding the larva. And the nurse bees don't get sick from it. It only affects larvae. So I don't keep pollen frames that from a dead hive. Uh-huh. So the next stage is the wax building, and you see that fat belly is beginning to shrink. Now, if the bee's fat body stayed full size, a worker bee could actually live 2 years instead of just the 6 to 8 weeks. So the fat body is everything in their lifespan, and I just think that they're so noble. Because literally, instead of individual bees living for 2 years, they feed out their vitellogenin and they support the entire hive with it. And then they only live like, 8 to 12 weeks. So, or 6 to 8 weeks. Day 20 through 23, they start guarding the hive, doing, almost outside activities, and their fat body gets a little smaller. And by the time they're a forager, the second half of their life, their fat body is almost completely used up, and they can't even support themselves anymore. They rely on the nurse bees for food. So let's bring this into fat bodies. So to fat bees, winter bees. So really, the main crux of this is how to get your bees to overwinter. So we're going to take this information now that we know about fat bodies and how it affects bees, and we're going to look at how it affects losing hives in the winter. 80% of our colony losses are due to varroa. 80% of colony losses are due to varroa. Varroa mites.
I don't understand that last word, sorry.
Oh, you don't know? Do you know what a varroa mite is?
No.
Oh, okay. It's a mite. It's a parasite.
Oh.
Okay. And so before the varroa mite came in the 1980s, beekeepers lost like 10, maybe 15% of their hives every year. You could literally put a box in your backyard and the bees would just live. American foul brood was a problem back then. Now our average losses are 40%. So if you think your bees died of the wet, if you think they died of starvation, all of these other things, it's almost always varroa. Okay. And so we're going to learn, so we're going to learn how that, and the varroa mite affects the fat body. So we're going to learn how that happens. Well, we did learn how that happens. So the varroa mite, when it attaches to the bee, it attaches to the brood to that fat body, and they actually eat the fat body, and they destroy the fat body of the little larva. And what happens is when the bee emerges, they still look the same. You can't tell that they've been affected by a varroa mite, but their fat body can never grow to be a full-sized fat body. And they often have a very short life. They don't live very long. And so what you wind up with is this kind of dwindling hive that never really takes off, because the varroa mite are destroying the fat bodies that feed the nutrition to the entire colony. Okay, you can't see it, but that's the effect, and it's permanent. Once they've destroyed that fat body, there is nothing that we can do to help the bees to recover from that. They simply can't grow a big healthy fat bodies. So let's talk a little bit about fat bees. They're also known as eudygenous bees, and those are the bees that can live 6 months during the winter. And we're trying to make sure that all of our bees can live all winter long. So they don't age through normal tasks. They are actually physiologically different than worker bees. And they can do any task in the colony at any time. So they can feed brood, they can clean, they can guard, they kind of do everything, every task in the hive. They are made mostly in September in the Pacific Northwest. So when we see our brood nests starting to get smaller in September, that small patch of brood, those bees that they make, those are the winter bees. And they're primarily an adaptive response to cold winters. So in warmer climates, in California and Florida, they don't have winter bees so much because the bees don't need to go dormant during the winter. They don't have to store up all of this energy and not be able to forage for months on end. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we kind of get one flow. We get blackberries, sometimes a little bit of maple, like right now, and a little bit in the fall, but we really get one flow.
Which is when?
Blackberries.
In the spring?
No, blackberries generally start mid-June and end mid-July. So when the blackberries are blooming, that's when your bees are bringing in honey. And that's kind of in the east and the Midwest, they get all of these different flows. They start with a huge maple flow, like in March, right? The minute as soon as the snow is melting, they've got flows, and they kind of get these flows off and on through the whole summer. And then it often ends with goldenrod, which is a really stinky honey. It smells like old dirty socks, but it's the last flow of the year. And the beekeepers often leave that on the hive for the bees for winter. It's the bees' winter food. And so they can take all of those other flows during the year. In the Pacific Northwest, it takes our bees 60 to 90 pounds of honey to get through the winter. That's basically 10 beef frames of honey to get through the winter. And the average amount of honey that a honeybee brings in the Pacific Northwest is about 60 to 90 pounds. So unless it's a pretty good year, there's a lot of years when we either don't get honey, or we, if they put it up in the super and we take it, we might have to feed them a little bit of sugar syrup in the fall to make up that deficit. Let's see. So winter bees are everything in a colony. So what makes a winter bee? They are actually exactly the same as a summer bee. They just have been exposed to different conditions. They don't feed out their vitellogenin. There's less brood, so they don't have to feed out their fat bodies. They keep them, they can store them. They get and this happens when the day length gets shorter and months get colder. Then and the brood nest gets smaller. Then those bees that are in there have fewer babies to feed, and their fat bodies stay nice and large. And the pheromone that's not there because of the brood, there's less open brood, doesn't trigger off that aging process in feeding out their vitellogenin. So let's see here. So let's take a look at, we're going to kind of wrap this whole last number of slides up on one slide. So the green arrow is synthesization. The synthesis rate of vitellogenin, and it's either a small arrow or big lightning bolt, depending on how much they're making. The dot is how large their fat belly is, and the arrow, the red arrow, is if they are either being fed by others or if they are feeders. So they start out as really young bees, and they have very small fat bodies, and they're primarily fed by other bees. Remember, on days 1 through 3. And then days 4 through 12, they become nurse bees, and they have really large fat bodies. They make a lot of vitellogenin, and they feed everybody else in the colony. And then as they get to be a little bit older nurse bees, they continue feeding. But this winter bee arrow, this isn't my chart, but this is actually in the wrong spot. So remember, if they haven't fed out any of their vitellogenin, they can become winter bees. So I think this blue line actually belongs all the way back on the previous bee, because we don't want them getting small atrophied fat bellies and then trying to go through the winter. So at this point, if they're a nurse bee and they haven't been feeding out and reducing their fat body, then they can become a winter bee. And that's the biggest fat body there is. Or as they feed it out and it starts getting smaller and they age, then they become foragers and the fat body becomes really small. If needed, they can become nurse bees again, but the fat body is never quite as big as it was when they were in their as a full-on nurse bee. And then the foragers eventually use up all of their fat body and they die. So let's talk a little bit about varroa mites. So we're going to wrap this back around to varroa mites. So believe it or not, this entire thing was about varroa mites. So you learn about the fat body and the effect that the varroa mite has on it. But what it does is it consumes the larval fat body. So the larva doesn't have a shape yet. It's just this kind of bag of soup, this big bag of nutritious soup. And the varroa attaches on that and drinks that soup and eats the larva, but they attach specifically in the spot where the fat body is developing. So as the varroa goes through metamorphosis and that fat body starts developing, that's where the varroa is feeding on the larva's fat body. It stunts their growth. They're lighter, they're smaller bees, and it reduces the number of nurse bees. The way it reduces the number of nurse bees is because they come out with smaller fat bodies and they age faster. Okay, so you wind up with a lot fewer nurse bees. It shortens the life of the entire colony. The nurse bees live less time. When you've got shorter lived nurse bees, then that means the colony is not going to have as many bees converting to foragers. They need them to be nurse bees feeding the brood. So they wind up with fewer foragers. And with fewer foragers, there's less food coming in. So you can see how it's this, really tough downward spiral that shortens the life of the entire colony. It interferes with the bee's ability to be a winter bee. So what happens if their fat bodies are compromised? You've got in September, you've got a mites in your colony, and your winter bees have mites. Okay, those are the bees that have to live all winter long. And if the mites are eating the fat bodies on your winter bees, they can't live all winter. They're short-lived bees. And so basically what you're doing is you're going into winter with summer bees. And those bees are going to live the 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 10 weeks. And then you start seeing your colonies dying in the winter. And they die through dwindling. So what happens is the summer bees, basically what should be winter bees are now summer bees. And as they slowly die off, the cluster gets smaller and smaller until it can't retain enough heat to heat the colony. So imagine being out in the woods and it's kind of a damp, rainy day in the woods, and you light a fire to get warm. And the fire pushes off all of that humidity, and you kind of get this nice, dry, warm area from the fire. But as that fire gets smaller and smaller and doesn't generate as much heat, all of that humidity starts closing in, right? The dampness, and it gets harder and harder to stay warm. So that's what happens within the colony. If the bees are affected, winter bees aren't there, they're slowly dwindling off, and that cluster is getting smaller and smaller, you're going to get more moisture in the colony. And the bees are going to have a harder time moving that colony to get to where the honey is. Well, sometimes they'll die and there's still honey on the frame. And what you'll find in the spring is a small dead cluster. It's kind of stuck in the middle of the hive. Sometimes there's food there, and not a whole lot of bees on the bottom board. There's some bees, but not a lot, because bees are really altruistic. And when they're dying, they leave the colony. They don't want to make anybody else sick. So they leave the colony. So you find a few dead bees, but not a lot. And you'll find moldy bees. So people often say, my bees died of the mold or the wet. No, they died because they couldn't generate enough heat. Or they say, my bees died from the cold. Well, no, they died because there wasn't enough bees to generate enough heat. So there's this whole cyclical things that the bees need to stay warm. And I actually wrap my hives in the winter, because I want them to be able to stay warm and to be able to do immunity functions within that colony instead of spending all of their energy clustered up and staying warm. I want them to be able to move out a little bit more, do grooming and things like that. And it weakens their immunity. So we haven't even talked about the viruses from the bees. There's 18 viruses right now that are killing our bees. And the varroa mite is like a dirty hypodermic needle. They are full of virus. They inject it into the bees, and they also cut holes in the bees' exoskeleton so virus can enter. So this is only half of the story of all the viruses and everything. The bees also bring, the varroa also brings to the bees.
A little confusion there.
Okay.
Does one mite have one disease, or does one mite have 18, or there are 18 kinds of mites? Do you see that?
Yeah, it depends on what's in the colony. So if there's a cold going around, then you're going to kind of catch whatever cold is going around. Some of them, like mosquitoes, actually carry specific viruses and inject them. And some of them, if there's a level of it in the colony, the bees will succumb to it. So, for example, it weakens them enough so that even if the virus is there, the bees catch it and get sick from it, where otherwise they might not, that might not happen. Bees have the lowest individual immunity of any animal in the animal kingdom. They individually, they have really low immune system. All of their immunity comes from social activities, from grooming, from putting propolis around, from feeding this vitellogenin that has the inoculation in it. They have social immunity. And so when they get smaller and smaller and sicker, they lose the ability to stay healthy. It's this really compounding effect.
Thank
you. So we're going to talk a little bit about treatment. Now we're just about done. I think this is almost, we're getting real close to the last slide here. So I just want to impress upon you the importance of treatments. We talked a little bit about spring treatments. The common advice out there is to start measuring your bees in August and start treating in August. And I'm going to tell you that's too late. Okay. Let's say, for example, you've got a high varroa count here on July 31st. This is the last day of July. So what happens is your nurse bees are sick, and the viral load in the colony is really high. So when the mites show up, that viral load in the colony goes up. So let's say you treat here, it takes a minimum of 12 days to treat. If you use a really strong thing like formic acid, that's 10 or 12 days. Oxalic acid is 12 days. So you've got a colony of bees here that even though by the time they get to the 13th here, maybe there's no varroa left in the colony here. Then we go back and we do our test and we go, great, my treatment's worked. I think my bees are going to be okay for winter. But you have an entire generation of nurse bees that are sick. They have viruses, they have small fat bodies, they can't take care of that next generation of brood. So this second generation of brood is fed by sick nurse bees. So they can't be 100% healthy. It takes until this third generation, a full month, before the bees can recover from a high virus load from the varroa. So if you're treating in July, and this is, if you don't treat until the middle of August, and it takes 30 days for your bees to get healthy again, you're all the way into the middle of September, and you've lost half of your winter bees because they haven't been able to make winter bees yet. They really need to start making winter bees in late August. So your fall treatments need to take place in late July, maybe the first week in August, to give the bees a chance to make those winter bees and be really healthy. Does that make sense? Okay. I talk a lot about treating your varroa. And this is just another way to look at it. So July 5th or 20, you've got 10 to 25 days of mite treatment. You've got a generation of sick bees. You've got a second generation of sick bees, and then it takes a month to get healthy bees after you've had a high mite count.
2 months,
30 days.
30 days to get out, but then 30 to pick up the momentum.
Yeah, another 30 days to make those bees. Yeah, so they need a full month to make winter bees. And so they need a full, if you let your varroa mites counts get high, it takes 30 days for them to recover. And so that's why so many people have their bees collapse in the middle of winter. It really is from varroa, even though you can't see it, even though you never saw a varroa on your bees, this is the effect that it has.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's right for us, isn't that right at the end of the honey flow?
Mhm.
So it's convenient to use treatments that maybe you can't, as soon as you pull those off, start treating.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to know what you're going to treat with ahead of time and have it on hand. So there are 2 treatments that are approved to use with honey supers. Oxalic acid and formic acid can both be used with the honey supers on, and it's not absorbed into the honey. I like to use formic acid in the fall. it's that, and I use it even if I think my counts are low, because I want to make sure I'm not building immunity in my bees. So I've used oxalic acid all year. Even if I have low mite counts, I'm going to go in there with a secondary treatment to make sure I'm not building resistance and immunity to the oxalic acid. So you want to make sure. One nice thing about treating in August is when you treat in late July, it wipes out your brood oftentimes. There's some brood going, and the treatments like Formic can be a little hard on the brood. It'll wipe out the brood, but consistently, and only the open brood, not the capped brood, consistently the queen will do rebound laying. So you'll go back a week or two later, and it's wall to wall brood. So you treat with formic acid and the queen goes, whoa, where'd all my brood go? And she lays it all up like crazy. And those are your winter bees, and they're nice and healthy. So that's kind of that's how I do my treatments in the fall.
Question,
Mhm.
Sure, I hope I'm
It's okay. We're almost done and we've got time.
all right, I got a stack here. I used to call it super, is that what it's called?
Yep.
I got a stack here, it's got no problems, I got a stack here that's got a few problems, and I got one that's just kicking everybody's butt.
Yeah.
And back over here, do I have to be concerned about those
Yeah, the
transfer?
Yeah, the Varroa drift.
How do you keep it from transfer?
You
don't?
No, so that's one of the things is you can test your mites in the fall, and I do recommend that you test for mites, because you need to know what your counts are. And in the fall, what happens is you can be going along and have 0 mites and 0 mites, and then all of a sudden you test them and you've got 15 mites, and you go, whoa, where did that come from? And you suddenly have a mite bomb in your hive. If your neighbor is not treating, then those bees are going to abscond, and they're going to leave that hive as the hive collapses, and they're going to show up in your hive with all those mites, or with all the mites. And also all these swarms that are going on right now, we don't hear of very many swarms surviving. There's a few of them in the walls, but not very many. Almost all swarms die before we get through winter. They just don't survive here in the Pacific Northwest very well. So you've got a swarm in a tree somewhere, and it's getting overtaken by Varroa, and it's getting cold. And once again, those swarms at the end of the fall will start collapsing and bring Varroa into you also. So does that answer?
Well, yeah. I'm here probably to find out if it's swarms. So if we take swarms tomorrow, we load them in the box.
Yep.
Being cheap, trying to make things work, and will those, if you care for them and you treat them for mites and do all that, will they survive?
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you treat them for mites, they will. They've done, Tom Seeley's done a lot of work on swarms, and he's found that if you don't treat your swarms for mites, they will die in 18 months. Some of them will make it through the winter, most of them won't, but within 18 months, they'll all be dead. But you can take a swarm and treat it just as if, you purchased the bees. Yeah. Yeah. I have a little harder time getting swarms to survive for some reason up in the Northwest. I mean, I catch a lot of them. Maybe it's because I catch them a little later. I don't know. They don't get as early a start as.
I heard you got a game before May 15th.
Yeah.
The momentum's off.
Yeah, a swarm in May is worth a bale of hay. A swarm in July is not worth a fly. Right? That's the old timer saying. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the very last slide is, how do you protect your bees? Okay, how do you keep your bees as healthy as possible? You want to make sure that they have a variety of pollen. That pollen is so incredibly important to the bees. It helps build their fat bodies. It feeds the whole colony. So look for pollen in your hive. And if it's missing, give them a pollen patty. It never hurts. It's a pollen substitute. It's made primarily out of like brewer's yeast and things like that. And it usually has like 10 to 15% real pollen in it. So it's a protein substitute for the bees. And there are people out there that say that if you give your bees pollen in the winter, they will build up and they'll get out of control. There are so many factors that go into the seasons of bees: temperature, day length, nutrition availability, that giving your bees pollen isn't gonna make them swarm or build up like crazy. And then you need to manage your Varroa. However you choose to do it. There's a lot of different ways, but the number one thing that you can do as a beekeeper is manage your varroa. That's why it took me so long to overwinter hives, because I didn't understand that. So, and now I do, and I had 100% in one of my apiaries last year. So thank you. That was really long. You listened to me talk for a really long time tonight. So.
We'll sign the paper.
Okay, good. Yeah, Sam.
We talked a lot about pollen in the, in all processes of between feeding other bees, feeding themselves. How much of that is, it all comes from pollen or pollen substitute, but is it not actually pollen anymore? It's been processed somehow. It's either bee bread or
So you mean raw pollen off the flower is not super digestible to the bees?
yeah.
Yeah, so they pack it in with enzymes and honey, and it partially pre-digests it and makes it more accessible. So pollen from the flowers is always better.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So yes, straight raw pollen it works, but it's not the best.
Yeah,
Better if it's processed or make bread out of it or whatever.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can use it, but I think it's better for their guts. And they're just starting to map out the bees' gut biome and figure out what's going on in there. So some really exciting bee nutritional things coming in the next couple of years. Yeah,
I was gonna ask you about the biome. So it seemed to me that body is very similar to the biome. Because the biome is really what controls in our body and in the bees. It controls the nervous system, the brain, hunger, sleep, everything.
Yeah.
So is there any relation at all to the importance of that connected to the biome of the bee?
Very much. The bees' gut biome is really important, just like ours are.
Their fat body.
Oh, the fat body?
Somehow, because it seems it's very similar in nature.
Yeah.
It's just why.
So that's a good question. The bee does have a stomach. So I'm not sure if it's a stomach where their digestion happens. They've compared the fat body more to the liver.
Liver?
Yeah, so it's where it filters out the toxins and provides a little bit of immunity support. I know it's a different, and they're not human. Yeah, but they sell probiotics for bees now.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of studies on it. Some say it helps, some say it doesn't.
Yeah. I'm actually studying the astro, some of the apogeny and all things like that, because I did a tape on
the epigenetics of them. Yeah.
Yeah, really, that's how I saw some of those words that were familiar. That's why I was curious, because it's doing more than it is.
Yeah. There's eventually there's really new bee research going on. So in the next 10 years, we're going to see so many new things. So one of the things you need to do as a beekeeper is just stay flexible. Keep your mind open. I'm teaching you things today. It's going to change in a couple of years as we learn more. So I do a lot of reading of scientific papers and things like that. So this is what the current information, what the scientists are currently telling us, and the scientists change their mind a lot. Yeah.
So to be clear, you switched to formic acid? Okay.
No, I use both. So I use.
Yeah, when do you switch?
Oh, I do one formic acid, one round or whatever, a treatment of formic acid in early August, late July, early August.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you need to find something in the fall that is compatible with honey supers, because it takes forever to get the honey supers off of our hives in the Pacific Northwest, because it takes them so long to evaporate and condense the nectar. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How do you spell it? Your acid?
Formic, oxalic is OXALIS, oxalic, I'm sorry, IC.
Selling.
Yes, thank you, IC, oxalic acid, I'm too tired, my brain's short, sorry, my brain's short, it's 2 hours talking on. Yeah.
Only one section. What is the percentage of oxalic? Let's say you go to the store and it says it's 5% hydrogen peroxide.
Amazon or it's like 99% something.
99.9.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
go ahead.
So the recipe that you sent me, I could get all the ingredients through Amazon very easily, 2 days.
Yep.
And it took me about 10 minutes to make.
Yep.
Enough for, probably probably too high to the year.
Yeah, so if you buy a pack of 10 Swedish sponges off of Amazon, and you cut each one in half, so a sponge is a treatment, even though there's 2 pads, it's called one treatment. One pack of 10 sponges is enough to treat 2 hives for the entire year. And it's, what was it, $5 or $6 for the sponges?
Yes, 7, and then the acid was maybe
Couple,
10.
yeah,
Glycerin
glycerin.
was most expensive,
Yeah.
bucks.
And it takes about, it's like somewhere between 1 and 2 cups of glycerin, and somewhere between 1 and 2 cups, it's 500 grams.
So I've got enough now for 3 years.
There you go. Store it in the freezer, because the sponges do break down over time, so store it in the freezer. And then, I don't know about you, we've started using those Swedish sponges in our kitchen, we really like them.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a question that just came in on the discussion.
Okay, Hiram, my understanding is that Jupiter's bees weigh significantly more than summer bees. Can I use the weight of my mite wash bees in October? So, oh, David, so David's asking, can I wash my mites in the fall and weigh them to see if I have winter bees or not? And unfortunately, it's micrograms. Each bee weighs such an incredibly small amount, and they weigh different amounts. Each bee weighs a different amount anyway. So unfortunately, you can't weigh your bees to tell. All you can do is keep the varroa mites away. Yeah.
Not a human, but I'm a writer with this.
Yes, hi.
And I'm doing the concept any hobbyist first about the teaching. So if anyone has time after to talk about, I don't know, the bees.
Yeah, so she's doing an article for The Stranger on where people meet or where people gather. And just kind of, clubs and people and how we come together. And she'd love, feel free, she'd love to chat with
Natalie.
Natalie, yes, Natalie. Yeah, yeah, that's cute, Natalie. Yeah.
So if the mites like the drones don't have the fat bodies, I assume.
They do. Well, not huge ones, but they do. Yeah.
Why are they targeting size?
I think it's size. So, drones take longer to develop, and they take 24 days instead of 21 days. So they can get more mites out of a drone cell than they can out of a worker bee cell. So they preferentially prefer growing on drones. Why they hang out on the drones in the hive? I think it's because the drones travel so much. And the drones are going out to all the different colonies, and it's kind of a survival method where the mites know that they'll get distributed.
Yeah, because the drones are the ones that congregate as well. So they're the ones more likely to be sharing across hives.
Say that again. I'm sorry, you muffled a little bit.
Sorry. The drones are the ones who congregate as part of the queen mating. And so
Yes.
they're more likely to be next to other bees as a result, so that they can
Yeah.
spread around.
They're very social. They're not all work oriented. They hang out in groups and hang out and drink beer and yeah.
When you look at your drone frames and stuff.
I don't use drone frames. I think that the bees put so much resources into making drones, and they really, really want those drones. I think they add things that we don't know to a hive. The poor drones are really maligned, right? So if I see a frame that has a whole ton of drone comb on it, I will scratch it, because you don't need that many drones, right? So I'll take out a bunch of those if it seems excessive drones. I just prefer to treat with oxalic acid. I can keep my bees, I can keep all that resources and all the energy they put into feeding those drones. I can keep that. They don't just go back and make new drones after I tear them all out. And I just think it's easier on them to treat. So there's a lot of kind of fear mongering out there over treating, and there's whole groups of people that are treatment free, right? Don't treat your bees for all different reasons. And it's all perfectly valid. I just want to say, I have never seen a colony die from being treated. Okay, occasionally you might lose a queen. It's pretty rare, but you might lose a queen if you put a really strong treatment on and put it on all at once. But if you're treating them consistently and gently through the year, the treatments are so much more gentle than what the mites do. It's just kind of, I don't know, don't be afraid to treat. And if you don't want to test, if you don't want to treat because you don't want to test, just treat. It's okay. Don't let not wanting to do a mite count stop you from treating your bees.
Can you explain that vaporizer thing? Like there's a.
Well, the vaporizers cost, you can get an inexpensive one for 50 to 150, or you can get like the 500 one. And what it does is it brings oxalic acid up to 230 degrees, and it vaporizes, not as water, actually it sublimates. Because there's no water in it, it sublimates and it expands through the hive and just gently coats the whole inside of the hive with a little bit of acid.
So the recipes for the sponges.
Yes, which is why oxalic acid is a little confusing because there's 3 different ways you can use it. And each of them has a different method. So just pick right in. Yes, the drizzle. Yeah. And the drizzle you only do one time. It's just read up and just read up and then decide what you're going to do and have all the supplies on hand. And that way, when you get there and you're hot and you're tired and the bees are cranky, you don't have to think about it. You can just do it.
So when you have to introduce the packages, how long do you wait before you treat them?
You can treat them while they're still in the package. No, you can treat them while they're still in the package. You can squirt them with the drizzle fluid, and you can squirt them while they're still in the package. Oxalic acid is most effective when there's no capped brood.
Right.
So I would treat them before they have capped brood. So that would be within the first 10 days.
Or you get a package, you have to put some myself gasoline in this thing and show them that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or you can put them in and let them chill for, a week or so, and then you can do a dribble on. Yeah.
And you have that on bees and stuff.
No, you get the bees wet. In fact, you want to get the bees wet with it, and then it takes off any mites that are in there.
So say it's fine. Or they have the mix of breeze.
Yep.
You right before the queen, well, not right before, but maybe
Yeah.
a week before, 1 week before the queen emerges.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk out there about bees swarming, helping to control varroa. And a swarm only helps if you treat when they've gone broodless. So you wait for a little while till all of that capped brood emerges, and then you treat, and then that works really well. But just swarming isn't gonna stop your mites. Yeah.
That's true.
No, the mites are still there.
And use the sponge, you lay it basically exactly the same as you would have pollen patty.
Yeah.
The same area generally.
Well, I put my pollen patties on top. You'd lay it like a formic acid pad on the frames, kind of like, yeah, in the middle of the brood.
Cause I'm there's a pollen between labs, like, oh, the meeting, so I have like 3,
Yeah,
usually 3 boxes, right?
yeah.
I should put pollen patties in between.
Then you would do it the same, one per box.
Yes, or the right 3 if you 2 right sandwich and then.
Yeah, and I do 2 deeps, and so I do 2 in between the 2 boxes. Yep.
With the spray bottle, you're talking about it.
Think so.
Sugar syrup, 1 to 1 sugar syrup, and then you dissolve, warm it up all the way, and dissolve oxalic acid into it.
Also,